Good evening. Welcome to the Cabarrus County Board of Education Legislative Meeting for 2024. We will move to 1.01, where I will call this meeting to order. We will move to 2.01 with our opening ceremony with our presentation of colors and our national anthem. Please stand.
Presenting our nation's colors tonight are members of the J.M. Robinson High School Air Force JROTC program, and their personnel includes Cadet Lieutenant Colonel Jade Escobar, Cadet First Lieutenant Nora Shable, Cadet Captain Joswaira Ocampo, and Cadet Airman First Class Ayla Castillo.
Color guard. Halt. Present colors. Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave. Left haste. Forward march.
Honoring America tonight with the singing of our national anthem were members of the Pitt School Road Elementary School Chorus, and their director is Mr. David Barba. Thank you.
Okay, board members, we'll move to 3.01 to adopt the agenda. I need a motion to adopt the agenda.
Madam
as
Chair.
presented.
I'd like to make an amendment to the agenda to add an action item for this. We have not been presented with the legislative agenda yet. It's not board approved. So until it's board approved, it really is not official. I think it's fine that we discuss it, but without a vote, don't think it's appropriate that you would be presenting it to our representatives or sending it to Raleigh.
So what motion would you like to add?
An action item, maybe number 6 or 5.2,
Before discussions?
or after discussion. Well, is there discussion? There's a presentation. So 5.2.
I think it would be 5.03 if it's after discussion.
either
Is
way.
that okay? So there's a motion on the floor to add an item on the agenda to approve the legislative agenda. Is there a second?
I'll second.
I have a motion by Mr. Walter, a second by Ms. Lindsay. All those in favor say aye. Could y'all do that with a raise of your hand? Okay. That motion is approved. Okay, board members, with that addition, I need a motion to approve the, adopt the agenda with the change that's been made.
Move to adopt the agenda as amended.
Second.
Have a motion by Mr. Floyd and a second by Mr. Walter. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The agenda has been adopted as presented with the change. So we're going to move to 4.01. We're waiting for Representative Crutchfield to get here, and our other representative, Diamond Stanton Williams, is had to go to a meeting in Raleigh, so she will not be here. So I move that we go ahead with presentation at 5.01. And then whenever Mr. Crutchfield gets here, we can do introductions. Is that okay with the board? Okay. So we'll go ahead and do the presentation.
Okay, first on the agenda this evening, we are going to have Mr. Phil Penn discuss the education funding. Mr. Penn?
Thanks, Superintendent. Good evening. Thank you. And thanks for taking part in the discussion tonight. My goal in this section of our presentation is point out a few deficiencies in our state education funding formulas and to propose some additional factors that I think will make the allocation of those funds more equitable. Can we jump to the next slide? As you know, I joined Cabarrus County Schools last July, and I've spent the last 9 months learning a lot about how public schools in this state are funded, especially after learning that we rank 113th in the state for per pupil funding from the state. I've also started to identify what state funding streams Cabarrus County does not participate in, and one of those is the Low Wealth County program. I recently dug more deeply into how the Low Wealth County funding is calculated, and you'll see the 3 factors shown here on the slide. One of those is the anticipated county revenue, the tax base per square mile, and a 3-year average of per capita income. And what's confusing to me is that the county revenue is calculated in terms of absolute dollars. It's not on a per resident basis, and it's not on a per pupil basis, which to me would be a much more compelling measure of a county's ability to fund education. Good. So when we see, from my perspective as a CFO, the formula is especially lacking because it ignores 2 socioeconomic indicators that were widely recognized as effective indicators of need within a population group. Those 2 factors are the percentage of students eligible for free and reduced price benefits in our school nutrition program and the number of students experiencing homelessness. Cabarrus County is widely perceived as wealthy, or at least well-resourced. Yet, in the speaking engagements that I've had around our county recently about the budget, members of the audience were very surprised to learn that we have over 700 students right now experiencing homelessness. And some of the staff members that work with our homeless student population feel that that number is drastically understated and that the number is probably closer to 1,000 students. Those same audience members were equally surprised to hear that almost half of our students, and that's more than 17,000 kids, are eligible for free or reduced price benefits in our school nutrition program, and that a third of our schools are eligible for Title I funds because the free and reduced populations within those schools are so large. All of that suggests to me very strongly that there's a deep undercurrent of need that the current funding formulas don't acknowledge or address. Candidly, I'm especially concerned to hear that some of the folks in the legislature are eager to increase funding for the Opportunity Scholarship Program, which would continue to divert funding away from our public schools. From our perspective broadly, and mine in particular, adequately funding public schools where there is a high concentration of need deserves a much higher level of consideration than increasing a scholarship program that lacks even basic income limits. Thank you for my time this evening. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Penn. I want to back up and just go back to 4.01 for the introductions. Now that Representative Crutchfield is here. Representative Crutchfield represents District 83 in the General Assembly, which includes parts of Cabarrus and Rowan counties. He was elected to his first term in November of 2022. Representative Crutchfield currently serves on the following committees: Appropriations, Education Appropriations, Education Universities, Health, Local Government, Land Use, Planning and Development, and the Joint Legislative Administrative Procedure Oversight Committee. And on behalf of the Board of Education and Cabarrus County Schools, we'd like to thank you for being in attendance tonight.
Thank you.
So would you have any discussion or any comments on what Mr. Penn just presented as far as our per pupil expenditure and our ADM when it comes to how that's appropriated?
Nothing like being put on the spot, huh? I don't really have anything to comment on that. I'm, as a freshman on the Appropriations Committee for Education, you'd be amazed at how little you get to know. So I don't have a lot of input into what's happening there, and I apologize for that, but it's just not something that's been part of my focus in my first session. So I have had some conversations with folks about how you measure the schools, the growth versus productivity, I guess it is, and achievement, and I support those. I think I said last week to Dr. Kopicki in a meeting that, you know, it's his, I look at him and his responsibility is to tell me what he needs, and my job to tell him how I can, my job to figure out how I can help him do that. So that's my goal here. Although I am elected, I will be serving the rest of this year, and I will not be reelected in November, but I'm going to do everything I can for you while I'm here, so I appreciate it.
Thank you. Okay, do we want to go to our next presentation?
Mr. Sain? I'm sorry, Dr. Williams.
Perfect, all right. So for part two, I will be talking about recruitment and retention of quality teachers. And we will be really focusing on incentivizing teacher recruitment and retention through higher pay as a strategic investment in our quality of education. So what I'd like to do is simply point out a bit of data here related to teacher pay in North Carolina. First, if you take a look at the graphic that is at the top left, we worked on what adjusted salary comparison looks like. These are salaries that are adjusted for inflation from year to year. So we went back to 1998 because that's the year I got started. So that's, for me on a personal level, it allows a bit of comparison here. And you can see that in 1998, a first-year teacher salary was $2,310, which when we adjust for 2024 value is about $4,400. That same year, a 30th year teacher salary was about just under $4,200, which adjusts to about $8,000, which is a pretty significant amount of money, right? Over a 10-month contract, that's an $80,000 a year, just over an $80,000 a year salary on a 10-month contract. If you trace that through the years, you will see that in each of those, for first-year teachers and for 30-year teachers, we are losing ground on adjusted wages year to year. In 2024, without the local supplement, our first-year teachers make $3,900 a year. That's $39,000 a year is what we pay our first-year teachers. And a 30th year teacher salary on a bachelor's degree right now is $5,510. And so our 30th year teachers have lost approximately, about $2,500 in earnings a month over the span of time. And so again, substantial impact on, those are actual take-home dollars. That's spending power for our teachers. If you come down to the bottom, the graphic that's in green, we recently completed a salary study, and we spent a lot of time in that salary study looking at our classified staff, but we did ask the agency to take a look at teachers for us, and you can see against our peers, in-state and out-of-state, we are at the minimum salary for teachers below our peers. As we get to the midpoint salary for teachers, we are about 12% below our peers, right, meaning mid-career. And when we reach the maximum salary or end of career for against our peers, we're about 19% below what our peers in the Southeast pay our teachers. And then finally, in that top right-hand corner, a master's degree pay, or the lack of it in North Carolina, has a significant impact on this. So I pulled it against York County, South Carolina, about a 30 or 45-minute drive away across the state line. And so we have folks that we are recruiting that could go to York County. And what you will see is we're just slightly below them for bachelor's degrees first year. I would say we're competitive there. A first-year teacher with a master's degree earned after 2014 is not eligible for pay in North Carolina. There is no increase for master's pay in North Carolina. So that, but in South Carolina, you will see that there's about a $500 a month increase there, right? If you trace that across to 30 years, any 30-year teacher who earned their master's degree after 2014 is not eligible. We're competitive bachelor's 30-year, but we are not competitive master's 30-year because our teachers just don't have that option in North Carolina. Also wanted to just point out regionally where North Carolina ranks. So our national rank, we are currently ranked 36th in the nation for average teacher pay. If you look across the Southeast, you will see that North Carolina sits significantly below, just above South Carolina, but significantly below Virginia, Maryland, and Pennsylvania, as well as below Georgia. So we are competitive. Again, if you pull the North Carolina salary back against the South Carolina adjusted for the cost of living, North Carolina is actually sitting below South Carolina when you apply cost of living. And then finally, on the right, I wanted to pull our teacher salaries against living wage, right? So average teacher salary against living wage in North Carolina, it's about $6,500 over the minimum living wage. First-year teachers about $9,000 below living wage, and those are the I would say the spots across the Southeast where we are furthest away from living wage against our peers across the Southeast. All in all, what that looks like for us is that we're having trouble competing in North Carolina for teachers. There is a teacher shortage. We've done a really good job in Cabarrus County trying to work around that. However, the lack of pay in North Carolina, both at the bottom end of the scale and significantly below at the top end of the scale, it really is impactful. And I'd also would be remiss if I didn't point out the impact that's having on pensions, right? So when we look at folks that stay in the profession for a full 30-year run, if we go back one slide, you will see that adjusted for 2024 value in 1998, that's an $8,000 a month that you would be pulling against for that pension. In 2024, that's about $5,500 a month that you would be pulling against on that pension. Significantly impacts the ability and the likelihood that our teachers will stay in the profession for the long run, because the retirement incentive at the salaries where we have teachers is just not there.
Dr. Williams, I know you alluded to it a little bit, but can you break down the master's pay and why they're not getting paid and what that legislation did?
It's a great question. So it was legislation in North Carolina that through the state legislature that came out that determined that master's degrees would not be paid after 2014. Anyone who earned a master's degree prior to that received a 10% increase on their base salary. And then after 2014, the state legislature determined that those programs, I assume, were not effective, and so they were no longer incentivizing getting a master's degree in North Carolina. Again, the states around us have not done that. So teachers who earned that degree prior to 2014 do get that increase. They do get that 10% incentive. Any teacher who did not complete that degree prior to 2014, it isn't an option. If they go back to school and get a master's degree, there is no pay incentive for that.
Thank you.
Dr. Williams, could you, for everyone's benefit, talk about the changes with longevity pay too for our experienced teachers?
Yeah, so North Carolina has a system for most state employees where there is longevity pay. So once per year, the amount varies depending on how long you've been with the state. Most state employees earn that amount, right? So I was working with someone the other day who's coming into a position that's not a teaching position that would be picking up longevity pay, and it's about 3.25% once a year because they've been with the state for more than 10 years. Several years ago, the state legislature eliminated that eliminate's a strong word. They migrated that into the teacher salaries and eliminated the annual payout. So I want to be careful how I say that, how it was phrased when it occurred. I would say for all intents and purposes, it was eliminated because they are no longer receiving that amount in addition to what the state teacher salary scale says, and that does apply to all teachers in the state.
I have a question. This doesn't sound much different from last year. Thanks for the presentation. So can you tell me how this compares? And I know there's probably not a whole lot of data to look at because this is so recent with opportunity scholarships and how the salaries differ from charter schools, private schools in comparison to what our teachers are making, especially now after learning that a lot of the teachers in those institutions are not always teachers or certified.
Correct. So there is so the folks in our charter schools, for example, do not have to have traditional licensure the way that teachers in public schools do. It is important to note that we do have a few schools in Cabarrus that also that are restart schools that have that same flexibility. I won't speak to specific numbers there, but I will get that data for you. There is some kind of early research coming out now looking at the charter school salaries against public school salaries. I think as our number of charter schools increases because that cap has been removed on charter schools, we'll be getting some more solid data on what those look like. The charter schools do have the ability to vary their pay for staff members. They don't have to follow the North Carolina state salary scale, and so they are able to recruit at higher levels in certain spots and fit it within their funding. Our schools, obviously, unless they are a restart school, do not have that same flexibility.
The reason for my question, thanks for that clarity, and whenever you get that information, it'd be helpful to see it.
Absolutely, thank you.
Any other questions, board members? Mr. Crutchfield, would you like to have anything that you could add to this for us?
I would just share with you that when I went to Raleigh, John Locke had a presentation where we sat down and looked at where North Carolina, on average across the state, I think we spend $86,000 per teacher. And I realize that, that includes benefits, that includes retirement type stuff. So there's a lot that goes into that. And I realize that, you look at these numbers and not every teacher gets that. But across the state, I think the average was $86,000. So that's what taxpayers are paying out of their pocket to support teachers. Not necessarily what they're getting directly to their paycheck, but it does come to them, I think, in terms of compensation and benefits. North Carolina, I don't have a history of North Carolina in teaching and their salaries and their not salaries, so this is good information. I appreciate it very much. I do know that we gave a pretty good raise last year. It's never enough, but we gave a pretty good raise in the biennium budget this year. So I think there's maybe, correct me if I'm wrong, 4% in 2024, maybe 3% in 2025. Is that the right number? 7% overall?
Yeah, that was for classified staff. That did not apply to the teacher salary scale.
Gotcha.
The teacher salary scale varied based on experience. Our early career teachers got more than our late career teachers did.
And I think the challenge for us is, as legislators is, okay, don't disagree with it. We should pay more for teachers. The question is, where do we get the money from? Ultimately it comes from the taxpayer somehow, some way. And I think as a state, as a whole, we have to look at it and say, hey, if we want to raise the pay of teachers, we have to be willing to pay more to get that. Because the taxpayers are the only source of revenue for the state of North Carolina. So that's something to keep in mind. And I'm not against teachers making more money. I know you go back to 2010, and my history is limited on that, but I know that, in 2010, we were in a $3 billion deficit with the state, and now we're in a surplus with it's $3 billion deficit with the federal government. Today, we're in a surplus because of, I think, good fiscal policy. While it hasn't benefited the teachers as much as possible, it has benefited overall the taxpayers in the state of North Carolina. But this is good information. I realize this is a hot topic for teachers. I've not heard anybody tell me that we should cut teacher pay. Everybody wants it to go up, and I get that. As a person who has 9 grandkids in the school system, I want the teachers to be happy, and I want to be willing to go to school and teach. So, thank you for the input. We'll take it back.
Yes.
Good afternoon, evening, I guess. So I'm Carrie Fugel. I'm the current Teacher of the Year for the district. So I'm coming from the perspective of I plan on being in the classroom for the long term. This is year 15, and so I'm now going to be looking at my frozen pay until the end. I think that is important to recognize that there are not very many veteran teachers left. A lot of them have left the profession because they can get higher paying jobs elsewhere. When we don't have the veteran teachers in our buildings, what we're seeing is the constant training and retraining and molding of people coming into the profession that are not educator trained as first career. I think the value of having your veteran teachers maintain for the duration of their careers is invaluable. And it just feels like a constant battle when we have to onboard so many new young professionals who didn't necessarily choose education. And so I think that needs to be something considered by North Carolina, is that, we deserve to be recognized for that longevity piece and for the hours that we put into it. So many educators are also having to take on second or third jobs, and that takes away from their goal of being an amazing classroom teacher because you can only spread yourself so thin. And so I am concerned about not just the plight of education system as far as recruiting educators, but what will it be like if there is no value in sticking it out? I plan on it, but I'm only one of very few. So I just feel like it's important that we recognize the value of those veteran teachers in our schools and the fact that we are being spread very, very thin to maintain and to move forward with our schools.
First, congratulations on being Teacher of the Year. That's awesome. That's an accomplishment. Please don't take what I say as not being concerned. I'm a small business owner here in town. We're over here on Wilshire Avenue, and I am constantly faced with the same thing you're talking about, with hiring new people, losing people because other people are paying more money, and having to retrain. So I know the pain of that, absolutely, in the school system, in the schoolroom, classroom. That's paramount. I do get that. So I do take that concern with it and I appreciate you sharing that.
So if I may. Representative Crutchfield, thank you for being here. I do appreciate it. And I also want to say thank you for always being open to conversation. So I appreciate that as well. I just want some clarity. I don't know if you know it's not, but I keep hearing that there is a large surplus in the budget. Is that accurate? I've heard anywhere from $1 billion to $3 billion surplus. Is that accurate?
When you say that, are you talking about the total surplus or this year alone?
Well, I guess either or. I guess I'm hearing if it's $3 billion or if it's a total of $3 billion. Either way, for me, if it's just this year or if it's $3 billion in total, I guess I'm not putting you on the spot, but if you do the math, and I'm just doing general math, there's roughly 93,000 public education teachers in the state of North Carolina. If you took 100 million of the $3 billion, if that's what the number is, I've heard estimates as high as 3.25 billion. So whatever that number is, I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but if I do the math, 100 million would mean if we took that 100 million of that 3 billion, and I know it repeats itself, it's repetitive each year, so you have to fund it, but that'd be $1,075 for every teacher in the state. If you did 200 million, it's 2,100. If you did 300 million, it'd be 3,200. So I just say that to say I'm advocating for our teachers and that work in the public school system, and I know you support them as well, but I think that we just need our reps to go to the House in Raleigh and advocate for that too. And to continually ask to, if we're going to use some of that surplus, I think that we owe it to our teachers to dedicate some of that money to them in terms of raises that are going to be long-sustaining. You know, when you look at this, you see that in this particular data point, we're 36th in the country in terms of our teacher pay, and yet we're one of the fastest growing states in the country. Depending on what data point you look at, we're either the 4th or 10th fastest growing city in the country with Charlotte. And Cabarrus County, I believe, is the 4th fastest growing county in the state. So a lot of data points are pointing to great economic success, and I commend the legislature for a lot of the initiatives that probably have spurred on some of that. But I do think we can't forget our educators. And again, I'm not saying that you do. I'm asking you to please advocate for these teachers, because I think the data points that we should be paying them more. I think people are trying to be fair, but I think that we need to be, we need to open our eyes and realize where we stand here in the state. If all these good economic things are taking place, I think that that's happening because we have great teachers, and they're producing great students, and they're producing great workers, and you yourself are a small business owner. So I just ask that you continue to advocate for us, and if that number is in the B's, if it's billions, I don't think asking for 100 million of that to support our teachers and give them a raise outside of the percentage that they're getting, depending on where they fall on the scale, as Dr. Williams alluded to, I think that would help them greatly, and it would go a long way in supporting that. You know, you hear a lot about recruitment and retention. I'll say it. You want to recruit and retain teachers, pay them. If you raise the salaries, you'll get people coming into the profession in larger numbers. Economically, it's just not feasible for a teacher. That's the hardest thing we challenge, is to pay. And we're kidding ourselves. We think that it's not. It's the pay that we're paying them. That's why they're not getting into it. There's other options for them. And that's just, it's heartbreaking for us, and it's very difficult for us, because we talk about recruitment retention all the time. And then when I hear those numbers, again, I'm not putting you on the spot, but I think, geez, if you have $3 billion, there's a way to pay our teachers. We need to pay them more. And it is our taxpayers' money, but I also look at it, pay them now or you're paying later, because if we don't educate our population or students, we're going to have bigger problems down the road if we don't pay them. So I just ask if you would continue to please strongly advocate for them. I know you have, we have had conversations. I have a captured audience. I just want to really drive that point home, and hope you can share that with your colleagues in Raleigh. And we'll be out there with a short session to advocate for them as well. But again, repeating myself, if we want to retain, we just need to recruit them. We will do that, but we got to pay them. And that to me is the easiest way to recruit teachers. So I thank you for listening to my soliloquy there. Thank you.
Well, thank you. You know, we do have a surplus in North Carolina. Whether the number is 3.2 or whatever the number is, I'm not sure. I do know that my experience of being up there a short time, that one of the things they're really cautious of is creating recurring expenses with non-reoccurring revenue. And that's why we have a surplus. And that, you know, I always tell my kids, it kind of translates down to what you do in your own household. You know, you don't go out and buy a new car because you have an extra $100. If you don't have that $100 every month, you better wait till you can get it every month before you make that expense. So I'm not saying we're doing that, but I am saying that's important up there, is to make sure we don't put a burden on the future by creating recurring expenses with non-recurring revenue. Now, what we can do with $3.2 billion is not totally up to me, as you well know. My understanding is that our revenues collections for 2024 are higher than expected. The question comes down to what will they do with that money? And we will have some talk about that in a short session. Hopefully we can advocate to get some of that for the teachers. So we'll see what happens with that. But I think there is some opportunity in this short session to see some improvement there.
Thank you.
I'd also, too, just like to comment that with inflation and with the cost of living that's increased in Cabarrus County, if a new teacher comes out of school and they are not even making $40,000 a year, for them to rent an apartment or buy a home is really hard and honestly impossible. So that's another reason that we are losing teachers and they're moving to other states, is because inflation is also a factor in this, and I just wanted to bring that up as well.
Thank you.
Real quick, if I could also, one, I just want to reemphasize what Ms. Fugel said, because that gets lost a lot. When we talk about, especially as budgets come out and people put up Facebook, you know, graphics and stuff that are one-pagers, you see averages. What gets lost in the average is the micro data that really matters, especially that year 15 plus teacher they're really caught up in it. In fact, when I was teaching, I was sat down by somebody I considered a mentor and told, you're approaching the point of no return. You really need to think about if you're going to keep doing this or not. And that's not a great environment, for us to have. Imagine those conversations happen a lot from people trying to look out for people. And we need to look out for people. Second, I want to emphasize what Ms. Adcock said on housing. I mean, that's what I do for a living. They can't afford to live. I mean, it is, you go back to this slide here and see they're $9,346 as a beginning teacher under the minimum living wage. That's generous. I mean, that's not even close. And they cannot buy a house. They can't even rent unless they get a couple roommates. And, that's staggering to think about, that we've got these folks in that position. So, hey, I know we can't, have $100 more and spend on a new car. I want to think about that too when it comes to other things that we fund. Like there's a lot of talk about opportunity school scholarships. When you think about that too, when we have extra money, so when we do have money, what are we spending it on? That's an important thing to be thinking about when we decide what to spend that money on.
Thanks, Brian. I do understand. I had a conversation with a young teacher at Weinkauf the other day. I think it was Weinkauf. Yeah, and she said, look, my rent's $2,000 a month. By the time I take my rent out, I don't have enough money for food for my kids. So I do understand what you're talking about, and I think it's critical that we look at that. So all I can do is advocate for you, okay? Yeah. And I do, Brian and I sat down and had a long conversation about this similar subject a month ago, and I haven't, probably 3 months ago now, but.
You're one of the few people that reached back out to me and sat down with me, and I appreciate that very much, yeah.
I appreciate your input, because, one of the things we talk about in the legislature, I talk about a lot, is I don't play in your sandbox. So unless you bring me your message and what you're dealing with in your world, I don't know that. And it's not that I don't want to, it's just that I don't have the experience that y'all have. So bringing that information to me is very beneficial to me to get in a position to pass good legislation. So thank you.
Mr. Sand, now it's your turn.
All right, thank you for the opportunity to discuss school performance grades. So our next recommendation is to adjust the school performance grades to offer a more holistic view of school effectiveness. So I have presented these slides to the school board, but to just recap, our current school accountability model for K-8 schools and for high schools is listed on this slide. So you can see in green for elementary and for middle schools, it is almost exclusively reading, math, and science scores, with the addition of English learner progress, which is how well our English learners have progressed according to some standards. And then in high school, you can see, again, English, math, cohort graduation rate, biology, and then essentially how students are doing on some college preparation tests. I also want to call attention to the fact that that counts as 80% of the grade. So not only are we almost exclusively relying on academic data, but because it is 80% of the formula is how well kids did on these assessments, there is very little movement within each of these grades. So right now, achievement counts as 80%, growth counts as 20%. So that means if a school were to make a tremendous difference in their test scores, and I would call a tremendous difference a 5% jump in achievement. So if you make a 5% jump across all of your reading, math, and science scores, that's only going to change your school performance grade by 4 points. It is a current 15-point model. So to move between grade bands, you've got to have an astronomical shift in your grades, which is just not very likely. So the next two slides come from the State Board of Education presentation that Catherine Truitt just presented. This is her presentation. I've slightly adjusted the numbers just so that it makes it's a little bit easier to see what's happening. So each graph vertically represents a scale based on the 2019 National Assessment for Education Progress. So we have picked a few states to compare North Carolina to, as well as providing the national average. So the red line represents the national average on each of those tests. The first test is the fourth grade math assessment in 2019. You can see the blue dot represents where North Carolina is. We were above the state average. We were kind of in the middle of those five states. The second vertical line represents the 8th grade math NAEP assessment. So you can see North Carolina far above the national average. You can see we landed above those other 4 states. Again, in the next 2 assessments, you can see North Carolina, again, above the national average, at or above the top of each of those states listed. So we generally, compared to these states, perform well on national assessments of reading and math. On the far right in the blue box, that represents the percentage of A's and B's for the same states, as dictated by their accountability models. So each state is required to provide an A, B, C, D, F system, but it's left up to the states to determine how that system is created. So you can see Florida, 62% of schools in that state received either an A or a B. Texas, over 60% of schools received either an A or a B. In 2019, 37% of North Carolina schools received an A or a B. This past year, it was 27% of schools received either an A or a B. In Cabarrus County schools, we outperform that metric, so we have a higher proportion of schools that receive an A or a B, which we're obviously very proud of, but there is very little fluctuation between these models. Again, if you go back to this metric, it's just all academics, and then because it's a 15-point scale, there's just not much movement. So the argument is our state as a whole collectively outperforms other states, but then this really public-facing model does not truly represent what our schools are doing. The presentation that Catherine Truitt presented, instead of just having a single letter grade, A, B, C, D, F, she proposes, and Department of Public Instruction proposes having 4 letter grades. So much in the same way that my daughter brings home a report card that provides a math grade and a reading grade and a social studies grade and a science grade, we provide multiple grades. So 1 grade on achievement, 1 grade on growth, 1 grade on opportunities, and 1 grade on post-secondary preparation. That would provide a more holistic view of what the school is actually doing for students across multiple models, and then ideally would also demonstrate movement as schools improve various metrics. That's all I've got.
Okay, great. Thank you. So if I understood you right, what you're saying is all those schools aren't being measured the same.
Are you saying all the states are not
All
being
the
measured?
states are not measuring the same.
That's
So we're 37% with a different grading scale than what everybody else is using. And if we applied their grading scale, where would we be? Do you have any idea? Was that data up there and I missed it, or?
I did not have that data, but so our grading scale heavily emphasizes reading and math.
Uh-huh.
And in reading and math, we outperform those other schools, those other states. Keep in mind, this is a very public-facing measure of how our schools are performing. So a lot of times when great schools, or when a parent Googles information about a school, this is one of the first pieces of information that they receive. Additionally, this has federal and state reporting implications and accountability models. So we have schools that are deemed low performing. We have schools that are deemed TSI, CSI. Schools are given certain labels based on some of these metrics. And again, we over-identify D and F schools relative to other peers that we outperform.
So this is, yeah, go ahead, Mrs. Lindsay, go ahead.
So I think so thank you, Representative Crutchfield. That was actually one of the questions that I was wondering too. If we're being, if the model is not judging the same in other states, I would like to see, for example, if we were going to look at Florida, how do they do their grading so that they're at 62% and here we are, down at the bottom. What I don't want to lose is when you say to me, it's heavily judged on academics. Well, that's what it should be heavily judged on, is academics. I don't want to lose that piece of it because we're also looking at other things. I also understand the growth piece and that kind of thing, but I want to compare apples to apples with how the other states are doing it and look and see how we perform in that way, of course, without losing any of the aspects of why we do what we do, which is academics.
That's fair, and I can find exactly what those states provide. The current proposal by NCDPI, in addition to academics, so there would be 1 grade purely based on academics. So You would still get a grade based on how we did academically. You would get a separate grade based on how we did on growth. But it would just be, again, the same way my daughter's English grade is separated from her math grade, you would see 2 discrete grades for that. There would be a grade based on readiness, which is how well the school has prepared post-secondary options for students. So if it's a high school, it might include graduation rate. If it was an elementary school or a middle school, it could be weighted on how well the school has provided career development plans for students. And then finally, there's an opportunity metric. And the opportunity metric could include things like chronic absenteeism, the school climate, and then opportunities for extracurricular activities. It would still include all of the same academic metrics, but that would be separated out as its own metric and be more clear about what that school has done academically. You know, if you saw one school that was an A on academics and a C on post-secondary preparation, that would tell you more information than if you simply got a B as an overall rating.
Thank you. And again, it'd be interesting to me to know if we're measuring ourselves differently. I've come from a world where people use different scaling to determine who's the fastest, who's the slowest, and it's always interesting when you look at the data to find out how they really measured that the difference is significant and the results are not really comparable because they're not based on the same criteria. So knowing that would be helpful. If we're telling people we're 37.3% when really compared to Florida, if we measured ourselves like Florida, we're 58%, that would be a big deal. And I think we should know that. I think North Carolinian parents should know that because I do hear a lot of rhetoric sometimes of people talking about how poor North Carolina schools are compared to the rest of the country. And I personally would like to know if that's real, you know, or what the data really says about it.
And reading and math tests would suggest we outperform similar schools in similar states, but we just don't get credit for it just because of the way that our accountability model is set up.
Credit at the state level or credit across the country?
Well, at the school level, when you have so many schools that are deemed as low performing, or when you have so many schools that are listed as D or F schools, or that are put onto TSI or CSI lists, where that means they are consistently underperforming, there is a stigma associated with those schools, and there's a negative perception to schools that might be put on those lists.
Does it affect their funding, the negativeness? Are they better funded because they're lower, or are they less funded because they're lower?
You can make an argument that a negative perception could increase their school enrollment, that would impact their funding.
All right, thank you.
So I think the thing you have to look to, there's a lot of factors in here, right? I can show you different accountabilities as saying that we're doing better than the national average. So now the end number would be lower because most of our kids participate in the ACT, and the ACT average that we have here in our system is right around the state average, which is good. We aim to do better. The SAT average is 125 points above the national average. So I'm just using that as one indicator. So if we're saying one performance outweighs everything else, then I would say, well, how can you tell me that one assessment you give a kid in 3rd through 8th grade is how you're going to judge the entire school, and 80% of it is based on one performance, and only 20% is on the growth. Have we grown the child? We're putting less emphasis on the growth, which is why I would advocate for Catherine Truitt's model. I don't think it's perfect. I don't think it's the best model out there, but I think it shows improvement, and it measures more pieces to the puzzle while still focusing on academics. So there's an academic component on there that accounts for proficiency that gives you a grade. There's a growth item on there that again gives you a grade, and then as Mr. Sain pointed out, you have the readiness and opportunity realms that would be measured as well. That would be looking at more of the whole system in pieces. It's going to chronic absenteeism, extracurricular activities, school climate, things of that nature. I think the other thing is we're fooling ourselves. Zip code plays a big part in it too. Where's a kid live and come from? What's the resources in the home before they get to the school? You know, public schools accept all students and they show up. So I think the resources that we talk about, that we need the funding. We need the funding to address some of the mental health issues, some of the just general health issues, the catch-up issues. We're going to talk a little bit in a moment about early childhood learning, why that's so important and key to get these at-risk students, especially at-risk students, into the building as soon as we possibly can so we can address it. We have the expertise, and maybe the resources we don't have, is okay because we are the resource for that family to align them with the resources in the community to get them hooked up with we're the liaison. So this has come before. I think this has been talked about in the legislature for the last year or so, and you'll probably see it come up again. And I know that there's some momentum to get this through. So we'll see where it goes. But I think this is a fair model, and I would support this in terms of looking at the broader picture. But again, and I'll end on, the zip code matters, and we're kidding ourselves if we think that it doesn't, because it certainly does. And that's where the funding, that's why we need more funding to help those kids that have less when they walk in the door. Mr. Treadway?
I just wanted to clarify, we've talked about the 80% and the 20%, and we refer to one of those categories as academic. They're both academic. One is proficiency and one is growth in academics, but they're both academics.
That's right. And
That's a great point, Mr. Sain.
well, I was just going to add, school growth can vary wildly and fluctuate wildly within a year. So that is a 20-point model. You will see many schools that go from a positive growth to a negative growth, or from a negative to a positive within 1 year. It is a true measure of the impact of teachers on students in that year. The achievement score is the one that is incredibly static. So those scores do not typically fluctuate by more than 4 or 5 points in a year, and that's why the overall grade becomes so static, because the one that actually has an impact on teaching and learning, the growth, is only 20% of the score. The one that is probably baked in from the beginning represents 80%, and there's just very little movement and fluctuation.
I have a question. Sounds like we just validated reasoning for our teachers to get paid more and our staff to get paid more, so thanks for the information. So can you help me understand the 15 points? Are other states doing 14 points or 10 points? Can you help me understand that? And then maybe this question will help to clarify what I'm trying to get. You picked certain states. I'm not sure if that was already in the presentation, but why would we pick those states to help to answer some of my colleagues' questions about, maybe they're judging different, or, maybe the achievement is different over there. How do you get to those states?
Sure. I literally chose those states simply because that was in the State Board of Education presentation. So those were the states that were provided in a chart. I was just trying to be consistent. I think they tried to choose some other southern states that test scores similar to us. We obviously outperformed them, broadly speaking, as a whole, not necessarily on every single assessment, but then there was a stark difference in how well we performed. I do not have an answer to you whether it's a 15-point scale for each of those states. While we were sitting here, I did look up Florida's scale, for instance. Florida's looks very similar to our scale, except they include a college and career readiness component. So they have achievement, which is how well students did on different standardized tests. They have what they're calling learning gains, which sounds similar to our growth model. They have a graduation rate component, which we also have for high schools. And then if you notice, high school report card growth is typically higher than elementary and middle because they have a graduation rate component. And then Florida also has a college and career readiness acceleration component. And in that college and career readiness acceleration component, it is things like, did you earn a passing grade in a dual enrollment course? Did you take an AP or IB course? Did you get a certification for an industry? So it's just metrics that we already provide to students. It's just not necessarily counted in our accountability model.
And I know you're not the state superintendent, but I'm sure you have some suggestion on how we improve these metrics to make sure they're reflective of what's truly happening in our schools. Do you have any suggestions or any thoughts around how we make this better? I know you said you would agree with the superintendents, but just, humor me. Do you have any other thoughts around how we could make this truly capture what's happening?
Sure. Carl Sain would posit that we look at a lot of data in our county. Mm-hmm. And we look a lot of the, we have MTSS coaches at each school currently that examine all kinds of academic data, but they also look at discipline data, they look at attendance data. Obviously our principals come to data digs with school teams where they analyze data. We meet regularly with principals and administrative teams about different components of their data. A lot of that data and a lot of that work revolves around academics. And it feels like we are doing everything we can to budge that number up a point or 2 points or keep it where it was last year. And all of those conversations are so heavily geared around academic data that we oftentimes don't have the opportunities to celebrate other things that our schools are doing incredibly well. I feel like Cabarrus County Schools does a phenomenal job of providing students opportunities, of working on, of having positive climates in schools. We had a fantastic fine arts celebration just last week, and we still get to celebrate all of those things, but it's just not something that our schools get to focus on and provide data around throughout the year, because our model is so heavily influenced on academics that we don't get to celebrate those other things. Again, Catherine Truitt's model proposes 4 grades, 1 grade around opportunities within the school, 1 grade around career development or college readiness, 1 grade around achievement, and 1 grade around growth. And they've essentially worked towards that for the last year and a half, with various teams identifying, do we have this data already in place? Is this something that we could start reporting immediately? Is this something that's actually mathematically calculable, right? There's a lot of metrics that we point to schools on that it would be great to be able to use as a metric, but it may not be something that we can mathematically identify. So her model of those 4 different metrics would really give a better picture holistically of how the school has done.
Thank you.
Have you done any measuring using the system you'd like to use versus this other system to figure out what the difference would be? Have you guys done any analysis that way? Does that make sense what I'm saying?
It does. They have identified the metrics that would be included. They have not identified how they would be calculated. So to put something onto a 100-point score, that means you need to take whatever the data is and turn it into that 100-point scale. So for instance, graduation rate is already a 100-point scale, but something like AP scores may not necessarily, the number of students on an AP that receive an AP credential may not necessarily already be on a 100-point score. So until they tell us how these would necessarily be calculated or converted to a 100-point scale, it would be difficult to do that.
Thank you.
So I think too, if you go back to the accountability model, the NAEP scores, if you could put that slide back up. So I think it's important to look at, we kind of went over quickly, but again, to speak to how well our teachers are doing in the state of North Carolina. Back one more, please. I mean, this is against the National Assessment of Educational Progress Test, which is given every 2 years in the odd years. And while it's not mandatory, it's given in grades 4, 8, and 12. If you receive Title I funds from the federal government, you're required to take this test. And we have participated in this year in and year out. Well, it's not all our schools. They'll select schools that'll participate in it, and we'll do it. But again, when you look at it, we're holding our own, and we're above the national average in every single category: in math grade 4, math grade 8, reading grade 4, and reading grade 8. So again, it's another example on a different assessment, telling a different story, saying that we are achieving, we are meeting the proficiency levels that we should be meeting. And one could argue, well, then use that test. But I mean, again, that's not an every year test. But again, it's an example of, while you might have a school do poorly on one assessment on 1 year, here's another assessment tells a different story, saying the state of North Carolina's teachers in Cabarrus County has and does participate in the NAEP test, do well and succeed. So I think it just depends on what you're measuring. So I just think the more broader you measure schools and the more indicators that you identify to tell the story of your school, I think it's a better holistic picture of what's going on in the school system.
Ms. Escobar.
Thank you, Representative Crutchfield, for being here. I also love the fact that we keep on seeing you on PowerPoints, because that means that you're coming to our schools, and we appreciate that you visit and you speak to the teachers and you see the students. Carl, I wanted to ask, do we know at this point, if we use the superintendent's criteria, how that would change the letters grades of our schools?
We do not. We would be able to, I would be able to create some calculations around, again, out of the 4 indicators. Right now, they have proposed academics and progress. The other 2 indicators on readiness and opportunity, it's unclear exactly which data points would be used. So one is on, we have a data point on chronic absenteeism, for example. We do not have a data point on school climate. So we provide surveys around school climate, both to parents and students and to staff. It's been unclear exactly how some of these would be calculated.
Question for you. I know we're comparing North Carolina to other states, but do we compare county to county? Is that a comparison that we've done? And how do we fare Cabarrus County compared to the other 100 counties across the state?
Sure. Last year, when our school performance grades were released, I presented that in Cabarrus County schools, we had 9 schools that were A's and 7 schools that were B's. So 38% of Cabarrus County schools were either A's or B's. Across the state of North Carolina, 27% of schools were A's or B's. So 21% of A's compared to the state's 7% of schools were A's. And then 17% of our schools were B, and the state was about the same. So overall, 38% A's and B's for Cabarrus County, 27% A's and B's across the state of North Carolina.
Thank you. It's not that we want the rest of the state to be our measurement, but it is good to know where you stand compared to everyone else. So thank you for sharing that.
Our teachers are as good as anywhere you want to go. We have some of the best teachers, and not just in the state, but in the country. And I complete confidence saying that. I was in the classrooms today. I know some of my colleagues were in classrooms today. I was over, in particular, Whitington Hills. I know Mrs. Escobar was there herself today. And watching some of the IB kids perform and the work that they did, that's a product of how they're being taught in the class. Our teachers are phenomenal. So I have complete confidence that it doesn't matter the metric, we're going to succeed. Our teachers are outstanding.
Ms. Fugel?
To add to that, though, when you look at just the academic performance of those select tests, you're not considering the student-to-teacher ratio and the learning deficiencies and the per-pupil spending that went into that class, that actually trickled to that classroom to allow the teacher to do all the things. And so, although we are doing wonderful, but it's hard, and it's hard to get those students to perform to whatever that proficiency score is supposed to be when we're battling things that are out of our realm, like attendance and home stability and just mental health in general. And so with it being 80% of our school's score, with a lot of factors that are so beyond our 4 walls is extremely challenging and disheartening when you end up on, you know, a D or an F school when you know that you've poured in tremendous amount of effort to get your students to perform. So just throwing that piece in there.
Well, thank you for that. You know, it's often you have to be careful what other people say about you, what the measurement is. Sometimes you have to realize your own accomplishments when others don't. And I get that. As teachers, it's probably even a bigger issue. We had recently had the job fair, you know, and our company went out there to the job fair. And one of the things you get a real sense of is what you teachers deal with every day in terms of the student population. And hats off to you, quite honestly. And I'm not saying that negatively. I'm just saying it's not easy. And so, yeah, I get that. I really do. So thank you.
Mr. LeGrand?
All right, thank you, Dr. Kopicki. And our next district legislative priority is calendar flexibility. And Representative Crutchfield, as Ms. Escobar just mentioned, you'll probably recognize that gentleman on the screen. But I do want to highlight a few key reasons for this priority, starting with a very important one, which is the ability to administer exams prior to winter break. Promotes academic achievement, and the semester change into traditional calendar ends in mid-January, which would result in our students taking their exams after taking several days off for the winter break. Taking semester exams before that break greatly benefits our students academically. The second reason is that students who are dual enrolled within our community colleges benefit from the same start time as our local universities, or our local community colleges. And this currently benefits many of our high school students that are dual enrolled, both in their high school and their home high school and a community college, and working to earn college credits while they're still in high school and being on a similar schedule. Definitely makes that a lot more possible for the students. Third reason I'd like to highlight is that school districts can synchronize their academic calendars with colleges and universities, and students that choose to leave their high school after their first semester in their senior year are able to do so because the calendars are synchronized. And so this has become a more common practice with our high school seniors wishing to enroll in college early. We're seeing more and more of our students doing that as the graduation requirements continue to change, et cetera. But doing so within the traditional calendar is difficult because, as I just mentioned, the fact that the semester ends in the traditional calendar in mid-January means that they will take their final exam and have their final grades closer to the end of January, and the college, their college classes, if they wanted to enroll early, would have started at the beginning of January. And finally, the current law exempts charter schools, low-performance schools, schools with year-round programs, and we're just advocating that all schools have the same option for calendar flexibility.
So I think you're doing that now, right?
Yes.
You're exercising calendar flexibility today?
We are.
Breaking the laws, bunch of heathens out here. Hey, I only have one request. I support calendar flexibility 100%. I think it's the right thing to do. I only have one request. Do not make spring break the same week as election. Figure out how to fix that. That's my only input on that.
And Mr. Singh, we have seen increased proficiency and increased academic gains with this schedule, correct?
Yes, sir. We had done a study a year ago that indicated students that assessed before before the winter break outperformed students that did not assess before the winter break. This year, we have not run those numbers only because it's a little bit tricky to compare. It's an apples and oranges comparison from year to year and who's taking fall classes. So we were hoping just to get all of the data together before we could do that. But yes, our students that assess before the break perform better than the students that assess after the break.
Yeah, I think you would expect that because they're not taking a break and then picking it up and then trying to figure out what they forgot. So yeah, I would expect that would be better. The question would be how much, and I'd love to see that as well.
I think there's probably also some student wellness component associated with having a 2-week break where you're worried about an assessment, whether you're a student, whether you're a staff member. It's nice to have a break and have an actual break.
Thank you.
Is there an opportunity for us to get Cabarrus County Schools on a bill to put our calendar flexibility through this year?
Are you asking me to do some backroom deal to get you on a calendar flexibility?
No.
I'm just kidding. I don't know the answer to that, but I can certainly take it back and see if we could do a local bill for Cabarrus County. I know statewide it's been an issue for years before I ever got there. Something to do with people who have vacation homes or something. I don't quite know what that is, but I think this is a good thing for everybody. So if that's something y'all want, if you would send me something on that in writing, says requesting it, then I'll be happy to see if I can get it into a local bill and get that done.
We'll have that on your desk tomorrow. Thank you. Yes, sir. And then the last item on this evening's agenda is our early learning, and that's going to be highlighted by Ms. Trina Wenzel, who's our Director of Early Learning and the Early Childhood Education that takes place in Cabarrus County. I feel very comfortable saying this is one of the best here. Trina is a dedicated employee, does phenomenal work with the early learning students, and has the respect of everybody that she encounters, not just in the Cabarrus County school system, but throughout the community. When you talk about early learning, she's one of the experts in the field, so I appreciate her being here this evening. Trina?
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. I was told I couldn't talk very long because I said I could talk about early childhood all day, and I could. It has truly been my life's passion. I will say these on the next slide are just things that we know from tons of research over the years that early learning can support for children and families. And all of the things that you have heard up to this point can be impacted by early learning. We know that. And we know that when children have that opportunity for high quality early learning experiences, that you will see increases in these scores. You will see increases in attendance. You will see decreases in much of our justice system. And I found it just some general knowledge that North Carolina spent $3.3 billion on the justice system last year, and they spent $230 million on early childhood. So if that was reversed, what would that impact be? And hopefully the need would only be that great. One of the things as well, when you talk about early childhood in our county, as far as kind of at the state level, NC Pre-K has been the avenue for our children the year before they go to kindergarten. And our number of slots for our county right now is 351. It's been roughly the same amount since COVID, and that's been our slot allocation. That hasn't increased. And you know the growth in the county, and we're still only funded for that, roughly that same amount of children. So we would love to see an increase in NC Pre-K funding. You have a question?
No, I was just going to say, I know last year when we talked about this, you know, one of the things I put together as appropriation request last year was $1.8 million to try to fund this up front instead of funding it in the rear so that those seats would be available. Unfortunately, I didn't get any traction on it, but we'll try again.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. And that, you know, just, we have some of the very same issues. Our issues going to teacher retention, even securing teachers because of wages. And our teachers are required to have that birth to kindergarten license. It's a 4-year degree. Those folks can go to Chick-fil-A, they can go somewhere else and make more money than they're going to make, you know, working in schools. So oftentimes it is very difficult to find staff and then to retain staff. Of course, also, one of just another statistic in our county, things such as we have 130 children on a subsidy, child care subsidy waiting list that can't, they are approved for care, they can't find care. And so, you know, you've got those empty, oftentimes centers. We know really since 22, the number of child care centers in North Carolina has consistently decreased. So we are just every day losing places for children to have care, which impacts families in so many ways, which in turn impacts all of the things that we've just talked about. Because when you have those financial hardships on family members, it is hard to get to school on time. You're trying to find care. All the things, you go back to school lunches and all of those things. So it really is a huge impact across the board. But we really would love to see that increase in support for early childhood expansion programs, and then also with teacher retentions. And when you look at, I'll speak to what my colleagues have talked about in North Carolina, the NC Pre-K program funds private child care centers. If they have NC Pre-K in those programs, they're funded at $719 a slot. If they're funded in public schools, they're funded at $489 a slot. So there's a huge difference. We are very fortunate in our community that our Smart Start puts in additional funds to help raise that rate. But across the state, that funding difference between public schools and private agencies it's huge, and public schools can't oftentimes. And I have many colleagues across the state. School systems don't, because you can't. The gap is too big, and so children go without care. So we really, you know, want to advocate for that increase for expansion programs, and then of course, I'm just looking at the differences in the cost, and then to go along with what Dr. Williams talked about, teacher pay.
Thank you. Some of the things I say in Raleigh sometimes that are not taken very positively is I look at, because I sit on university appropriations, and I look at the money we spend at the college level, and I've said, I gotta believe, and you just confirmed it, that if we would spend this money on the front end, we'd have less money to spend on the back end.
Absolutely.
It doesn't get a lot of traction, but that's what I do support that, and I do look for ways of which we can spend that. I could identify $26 million that we spent last year that, as far as I'm concerned, was wasted. But I don't have all the control over that, but all I can do is continue to advocate that we look at how do we take that money. I mean, we're very proud of our university systems in North Carolina, and it's for good reason. For good reason. They're great schools. But I do think sometimes it goes a little too far, and I think we need to look at how do we pull some of that funding, $100 million, from the university system and say, let's fund early education and do a better job there. And if we do that, the other side will take care of itself.
Exactly.
So I
Thank
don't
you.
control the purse strings on that, but that is how I feel about it, if that makes any difference.
Any other questions?
So if we could slide to the student safety and wellness slides, please. Right there. Representative Crutchfield, I just wanted to point out to you that one of the things that we never forget, it's the number one thing that we focus on every day. And we're blessed to have a tremendous leader that is not only recognized locally but nationally in Amy Lauder, who does a fantastic job working with our SROs, both the Concord Sheriff's Department, the Concord City Police. She's presented at a local, regional, and national level. She's involved in a few national initiatives in terms of school safety, so I'm very confident saying we have one of the, again, it's another example of some of the expertise that we have here in Cabarrus County, and Mrs. Lauder is certainly one of those folks. So I just want to make sure that we're advocating for anything that comes across your desk for school safety initiatives, that we would truly value and appreciate that support. Anything that we could do to expand funding for mental health personnel and the social emotional learning needs of our kids would be beneficial for us. We've had a couple things we were able to do this year through our board support and through the county support. We were able to hire another social worker this year. We have a partnership with Atrium that allows us to do some telemedicine with some of our kids that need it with parent support. Obviously, we have nurses. We would definitely advocate for having a paid nurse in each of our 45 schools and be able to have that value, having the nurse in the school is tremendous for us. And Amy could speak directly to the Center for Safe Schools School Safety Grant Program if you have any question on that. It funds a lot of our SROs and some of the other things that go on in the school system. We would greatly appreciate any support to expand that. As everything else, as you've learned this evening, and I know you're aware of, everything becomes more expensive and more costly. Our law enforcement salaries, we do anticipate will and should continue to increase. We support that. And then anything you do to fund universal school meals for all students, we'd support 100%. And Amy and Dr. Roth, if I've missed anything, please feel free to speak. But I just want to make sure to advocate for the student safety and wellness for anything that comes across your desk. And I will tell you, if you need anything on that end, please reach out to us because we can help you. We have the resources and the people here that can give you all the information and data that you would need. Dr. Roth, Mrs. Lauder, did I miss anything there that you want to add to?
I would add that we also want to advocate for additional school psychologists. Our psychologists are
Counselors.
testing piece psychology with our PK. I know that Ms. Pencil can say that we are heavily invested in our students that are coming forward, but we are just making do with what we have, but the psychologists are not able to do as much mental health counseling as we would like because they are doing the educational assessments, which is also part of their job, and that's taking more of their time.
And I would just add, we're very fortunate to be able to have at least one counselor for every school, one SRO, one school nurse, that we partner with our agencies for those. And then school social workers and school psychologists are still itinerant for the most part. So we'd like to be able to get at least one per school for that, so we can support more comprehensively the mental health needs of our students.
Okay,
Thank you.
Can I ask a question? What's the wait time for an assessment these days?
We have for initial evaluations, 90 days is the expectation. We try to get them done in less time, so if there are questions, we've got time to work on those, but 90 days is the legal requirement.
To add to the whole child, if we are able to support them as a whole person, then we can take gains, but there's a lot of restriction in the classroom when students are dealing with so much outside of the classroom, and they just don't have the capacity to come to school to actually learn. And so we are oftentimes not high on their priority list when it comes to academics because there's so much outside of schooling that is burdening them. So anything we can do to support them so that as they do come to school, they can have that mindset to learn is huge in the classroom, especially if we want to look at scores and grading and all the things that then trickle through the system. But that the whole child, the whole child is not being taken care of, whether it's from the entire community or at home or whatnot. But it's not necessarily the school's responsibility to do and meet all those needs, but we know we have to in order to be able to educate the students to where they need to be and to set them up for success as they enter into adulthood and join the rest of us in society.
I think that's the goal here, right? I mean, to get them, education is really to get people to a point of where they can be successful and they can contribute to society in a positive way and not become a burden on society. So that's part of it, It'd be nice if you could just bring them in the room and set them down and teach every one of them exactly the same way, but it doesn't work that way. If you have more than one child, you know exactly what I'm talking about. They all take it differently, learn differently, and it has to be customized to that student. I've found this. I used to coach a lot of youth soccer, and while it's not the same, it's similar in the sense that I had to assess each child and figure out what did that kid need to become successful at this game. So I understand what you're talking about for sure. Yeah, thank you.
I would like to know, what are the statistics as far as our numbers of mental health professionals in our schools versus the state ratio?
But last year, we were close to the state average, but we're still very far away from our recommended ratios.
That's a great question, and what jogs my mind when you say that too is we definitely need more counselors and psychologists too, because our population is growing. So as our population grows, growth creates a lot of challenges. It's not just, okay, you need buildings in place to put the kids. There are a lot of other challenges that occur because of the growth. So obviously, anything you do to help us support more counselors, more psychologists, social workers, it helps us to address a lot of the issues that we're seeing on a daily basis.
Okay, that concludes our presentation. We have we're going to move to 5.02. Is there any other items that the board members want to discuss?
So how is this different from what we presented last year? What's been added, what's been removed? Anything?
Rob, I would have to go back and look at the last year's agenda to be exact, to give that information. A lot of this is similar stuff that we continue to advocate for. They keep rising to the top. I know the funding has been on there, the recruitment and retention, all these 5 items, I believe were similar items we had last year. I think the one thing that's not on there that we talked about last year was the Leandro funding, to continue to make sure that we advocate to push the legislature to fund the Leandro decision. And I think there were some technology initiatives on last year's as well. But a lot of these initiatives are similar to what we proposed last year. They continue to rise to the top when we talk to our community, we talk to our people, our board, our teachers, our administrators. These are initiatives that they have supported and continue to ask us to advocate behind and bring to the attention of our legislatures.
So what is the status of Leandro? Kevin, you have any idea?
I don't know. I know, it seems, Kirk, has anybody heard this? Did I hear that the Leandro settlement, if it ever came through, would be $2 billion? Is it more than that? $2 billion?
I don't know, I heard it's about $58 million to Cabarrus County.
About around 60, yeah.
I don't know the status of Leandro right now, I really don't. It's not something I've checked up on in the last 2 months, so I'd have to get back to you on
I
that.
think it's headed back to the state Supreme Court.
Okay.
Yeah. That's the last I heard too. Been hanging around for a long time.
Mr. Floyd?
Yeah, 2 quick things. First of all, again, thank you for being here. And I want to thank you now for a comment you made during the chamber breakfast the other day when you asked about schools and you said, I don't know everything about running schools, but he does. And you pointed at Dr. Kopicki and said, and I've got to count on him and rely on him. And I just appreciate that, 1, that you recognize that, and 2, that you're willing to lean on the experts that you have at your disposal. I want to tell a quick story here before I get into my question. I was in 3 structured learning classes this morning. And those are the these were nonverbal autistic kids, and I know you've been in one, 'cause you've been in one with me. Those people are doing God's work. I mean, everything we all think that we're doing well, they're dealing with it and doing it better. And they need our help. Those 3 classes, the principal told me all 3 of the teachers in those classes came from other positions who saw the need and asked to go take on that position, take on that immense challenge. And I just think, me personally, I'm inspired by that. You know, they need people to step up the way that they stepped up. We need to step up for them. And that is a place, in those EC classrooms in particular, there is a tremendous, tremendous need. And they don't always have the ability to advocate for themselves because those families are just hanging on for dear life. I mean, there's opportunity scholarships mean nothing to those people. They are hanging on for dear life, trying to survive to the next day. So I hope that we emphasize that point especially. I'm going to shift gears though, and what I want to talk about is transportation. We've got a couple things here. I know that recently I heard, I think Governor Cooper freed up $1 million for DOT to give us more trainers in North Carolina. And one question I want to ask is, can we make sure that Cabarrus County sees some of that money and sees some of that benefit? Because from what I understand, that money's freed up, but it's really helping 1 or 2 systems. We have a huge need here. For those who don't know what we're talking about, we get people, we hire them to be bus drivers. They got to wait to be trained. There's only 1 or 2 trainers around that can do it, and they can only train up to 2 people at a time, and it's a long, lengthy process. So one, I want to make sure that we're able to get our hands on some of that money and some of that funding to open up that pipeline and help our transportation shortage out. 2, another thing that would help on the subject of the training, not a lot of people know this. You know, I'm a licensed, or was a licensed bus driver. The hardest part that most people fail on the test is you have to go under the hood and point out all the parts of the bus and the engine, the fuel pump and all that stuff. Great information to know. I'm glad I know how to do it. When the bus breaks down, I'm not allowed to do anything about it. I've got to call somebody to go out there. There's a federal waiver in place already that exempts us from having to do that as part of the certification. North Carolina doesn't participate in that waiver. If we did, it would probably help us unclog the logjam. So it's something I'd really like to look into, and I can get you the information on that. Yeah, that'd be great. But I would really like to talk about those 2 things in particular. I mean, there's some more stuff I can talk about on bus driving. But I think from a state level, that's something that, 1, that money's already in place. We need to make sure we're advocating to get some of it here. And 2, let's see if we can take advantage of a waiver that already exists. I don't know why. I mean, there's a reason, but we just haven't taken advantage of it. That would maybe help us out some.
And I believe, Dr. Bowers, 12 states have taken advantage of that. So 12 states have already participated in that waiver program, so.
Yeah, if you'll send me something on that, Ron, I'd be glad to look at why we haven't done and what we could do to get it done. The other thing on training bus drivers, and I don't know if this helps at all, but I did know that we got a significant appropriation for Cabarrus Community College to build a truck driving school, which I think would help in the ability to have space to train. I think that's one of the things you guys probably have a difficulty with is where do we train them? And so hopefully that appropriation up there, when they're moving pretty quick on it, and Rowan County was really good about donating the land, and we got them some money to build the trucking school, the driving school, because it's not just trucking. We call it trucking school, but it's also going to train our EMS drivers and other folks that we use within the community. So I think that'll be very beneficial. Hopefully Cabarrus County will see some benefit from that as well. But send me that I'll definitely take a look at it.
Just an overall question for you. Thanks for being here, and thanks for, being in our schools and supporting our school system. So overall, when you say you don't have the handle or you don't control the purse strings, can you elaborate on what that means? How much power do our representatives bring to the general body from Cabarrus? How are we able to move, legislation based off of the representatives that, in your opinion, based off of the representatives that are there?
Well, that's a interesting question. One of the things we did ourselves a disadvantage of this year in the election process is we made sure that we sent nobody back to the State House that's ever been there before. So what does that do for us as a community? It hurts us. We lose that level of power or authority, that level of moving up. And so that's a real challenge for us in this community, because we've taken away the people that had the opportunity to move up in leadership and be in a position to have better influence on what happens. I can tell you, I sat through the entire budget process last year with all the senior chairs. As a freshman, I was asked to be there. I sat through every meeting. And I can tell you, those senior chairs determine where that money in the state gets spent. If you're not a senior chair, it's difficult to get money in Cabarrus County. We did a really good job between Kristen and Paul and myself of getting money to bring back to Cabarrus County, but having time in the seat, having, you talk about experience down the road, having that time in the seat is very valuable to our community in terms of what we can benefit from in terms of the state budget process. So I'm a little bit concerned about Cabarrus County next time around, and it's not because that we're not going to send good people up there, it's just that the people we're going to send have no institutional knowledge of how to get it done. And all I can say about that is advocate with the reps that you do have and try to get them to get in a position to do that. Because the people who benefit the most from reelecting someone who's doing a good job is the constituents, the people who live in those communities. And I'm kind of sad we didn't, not just for myself, but I'm sad for Cabarrus County that we're not sending people back up there that have the experience. Diamond's going maybe go back, she's got a race to run, but she'll have another year of experience. But the bottom line, the problem with that is she's in the minority party. And you need to understand that at the state level, the majority party creates the budget. So those are the people that have the experience and the ability of which to direct funds within the state. The corner offices ultimately make a lot of decisions between the House and the Senate. Everything we talk about in the budget meeting has to go to the corner office to be approved. Everything they talk about in the Senate meetings have to go to the Senate office, and then they bicker back and forth to see what we're going to get. But it's part of the process. It's how the sausage is made, as they say up there. And there's nothing wrong with it. You just have to have institutional knowledge to benefit from it. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it helps to bring perspective to the likelihood of us getting what we need in Cabarrus County, which is really the reason why we're all here.
Well,
thank you.
You have a good senator that should help us a good bit. So,
Any other questions for discussion? Okay, well, we'll move to 5.03, which is added to our agenda, which is an action item to approve the legislative agenda. Can we put that up on the monitor? Is that?
So, Madam Chair, is it the focus and the legislative priorities, are those the same thing, or what? Can somebody explain the differences?
So what you would be approving is the priority 1 through 5 that we talked about today, and the one thing that is not on there would be the safety and student wellness items. So they would be the agenda items we'd be putting forth to the board this evening.
Any other questions about that? Okay, I need a motion to approve the legislative agenda as presented.
So moved.
So moved.
So I have a motion by Ms. Escobar, a second by Mr. Floyd. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that legislative agenda is approved. Mr. Crutchfield?
I was just going to say, before we're done, I'd like to really speak at the end. Okay.
Okay. At this time, I will let you make your closing remarks.
I just want to tell you I appreciate the opportunity to come here and sit before you all and learn more about what you do and what I can do to help you. It's very valuable to me in the role that I have up there to know that. There's a lot to know to be a legislator because we're not talking about just education up there. It's all the other areas that of importance to us as citizens of the state of North Carolina. So knowing what your challenges are. I got a chance last week during Bring Your Legislator to School Day to go to my grandson's school and meet with his class and also go to a high school civics class. And I got done with that discussion in the high school civics class, and I told my legislative assistant, I said, Caitlin, I want you to call every civics teacher in the school system. I want to go talk to their students. Because I just enjoyed that so much of sharing with them how the sausage is made, what happens in Raleigh, and hopefully spurring them with an interest when they start to, fortunately it was before they're going to learn state government. So now that they've had an exposure to someone who actually works there, that maybe they'll be more inspired to pay closer attention. One of the things I'd love to see out of Cabarrus County as a legislator is we get 2 positions every year for, I forget the name of it, basically young folks that get to come up there and spend a week in the legislature with us. And I've yet to have anybody from Cabarrus County come up. I think it's a real lost opportunity. So if you have civic students or no teachers that have civic students that would love to come up there and be sit in the house for a week and see what we do, I think it's very valuable for them in the process, and I encourage you to do that. And just at the end of it, thanks again for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you. Okay, board members, we will move to 6.01, where I'll call for a motion to convene in closed session. to consult with an attorney and preserve the attorney-client privilege pursuant to General Statute 143, 318, 11A3, including the case involving Save Our Schools Association, and to consider confidential personnel matters pursuant to General Statute 143, 318, 11A6. I have a motion by Ms. Sandage, a second by Mr. Treadaway. All those in favor say aye. Opposed? We are now in closed session. Thank you.